So sexy.
Ooh.
I just get you going. Gets the people going. All right, so let's just go ahead. We're going to kind of do these just like we did the quarterbacks this time, you know, the consensus rankings here of where we came out. Obviously, our rankings differ. You have some guys in there that's really, I was like, ooh, that's spicy. Like, I feel like I have one guy that's like super spicy, but yours like are like just coming in with the ghost pepper flames with some of your guys. But we'll be sure to hit on some of those. But let's just go ahead and start it off. I think everybody's tight end one is Travis Kelce. For me, it's really the big three, right? It's Kelce, Kittle, and Mark Andrews. I think Zach Ertz has kind of fallen to that tier below for me. But for me, I think it's still Travis Kelce number one. He's been the tight end one 4 straight seasons. Last year, he had 14 tight end 1 weeks. He was first or tied for first in fantasy points per game with George Kittle. He had received 24% of the targets. He ran a route on 85.4% of his snaps. 136 targets was first. He was second in deep targets. Finished with 1,200 yards, 6 touchdowns. So, I mean, the dude is a monster. He's just now turning 31. It doesn't really worry me with tight ends. I still think that he has at least another 2 or 3 elite seasons left in him. He's really been somebody that really has never really dealt with too many injuries. So he was also second in missed tackles forced, and he had the most catches for first downs or touchdowns combined, which was 71, which is an interesting fact to keep in mind, considering the Scott Fish Bowl is coming up and you get points for first down. So.
Yeah, we don't have to dive any further into Travis Kelce. You got QB1 throwing to tight end 1. It's the other guys who are going to be below this are in more run heavy offenses. I mean, outside of Ertz, obviously, but the next 2 of what make up our top tier of the tight ends, just going to be more opportunity coming Kelce's way, and probably more touchdowns and more points as well. So I think we can.
I mean, even George Kittle. I mean, I think there could be some people that have George Kittle ahead of Travis Kelce. George Kittle, you know, is 27 or about to be 27. And like I said, 15.9 fantasy points per game. I mean, they're both elite options, right? I don't think we need to really spend too much time discussing either one of them. Both of them command heavy target shares on their offense. The one I do think is someone interested about Mark Andrews, because I really wouldn't be surprised if Mark Andrews finished as the tight end 1 this year. Because of, if you look at his numbers last year, like he was super efficient last year. He only played 43% of the snaps. He only ran a route on 55% of his snaps, which is pretty low. And then he did have 98 targets, 20 deep targets, which was third, and he did command 24% of the targets in that offense. And he had 13.8 fantasy points per game. I think there's still room to grow here with this. Now, especially with Hayden Hearst gone, that vacates 40 of those targets that was there. I think Nick Boyle is still there, but he's more of that blocking inline tight end. But I think for Mark Andrews, I think he really can command the I think that target share could go up and maybe end up somewhere in close to the vicinity of George Kittle, being at 28%. That 28% target share, I think probably looking at somewhere in the range of, he's had 64 receptions. I think you could see that 70 to 80 reception mark for him, over 1,000 yards and double-digit touchdowns. So I think there is room for Mark Andrews still to grow here.
I think so as well. The touchdowns are high for the amount of yards he had, right? Only 852 yards, 10 touchdowns. To put that in perspective, Kittle had 1,300 yards last year and only 5 touchdowns. I mean, 2 years ago, 1,300 yards, only 5 touchdowns. And then last year in 2019, he had over 1,000 yards again, but only 5 touchdowns again in 2019. So, and the thing I still think Andrews is going to be the centerpiece of that passing offense. But the thing to monitor and watch out for is the fact that Hollywood Brown was coming off of that foot injury going like right into the season last year. So if he's healthy, and he takes another step forward, you know, maybe eats into some of that target share. But I still think that Andrews is going to be the number 1 target for the Ravens.
I completely agree on that. So yeah. So those are our top 3. I think that's pretty much everybody's top 3. There might be some people have Zach Ertz, you know, maybe ahead of one of these guys, but I just can't do it. Even though, I mean, everything looked really good for Zach Ertz last year. He had he played 90% of the snaps. He played almost 30% of the snaps from the slot, 82% route participation, 134 targets.
Today, Junior.
I know, 6 deep targets, almost 24% of the targets, 14.2 fantasy points per game, 88 receptions, 916 yards, 6 touchdowns. Like, so there was a lot to like with him. However, he only had 9 tight end 1 weeks, which is, I mean, it's not terrible, but he also had 5 tight end 2 weeks. And I think that something that's going to affect him is the fact that Dallas Goedert is there. And it's going to be interesting to see now that once all the other weapons are back, now with Jalen Reagor added to the mix, and then you have, when Alshon returns, Deshaun Jackson, if he can stay healthy. Like, I don't think the targets are going to be there for Zach Ertz. And for me, that's why I am dropping Zach Ertz down. Because he's not somebody that's so much of a deep threat. He kind of plays that that underneath middle, and he's a big red zone target. But I think that Dallas Goedert also eats into that, and I think that is my problem with Zach Ertz. I still like Zach Ertz, the player. I still think that he could be solid, but I just think that he just does not, for me, belong in that same tier anymore. At least this year with Mark Andrews, George Kittle, and Travis Kelce.
Yep, I agree that our top 4 here are going to be pretty boring to listen to for the TFA fan that's listening, because I think we're just kind of parroting each other and agreeing with each other. But I mean, there really isn't much else to add there. I think you hit the nail on the head as far as the targets and all the other pieces that are coming in. And then let's not forget, if Dallas Goedert takes another step forward, apparently really liked in that locker room and within that team. So if he takes that step forward, Ertz really hasn't been improving or climbing. He's just been steady across the board, which has been, obviously, that's been awesome for fantasy purposes. But if Goddard starts to climb up a little bit, if Reagor gets involved, like you said, Djax, Alshon, all those guys, let's not forget RB1 this year, Miles Sanders, also going to be heavily involved in that passing game. So hashtag nuts on the table.
There we go. We got to bring it out. You got to let them know. You got to pull them out every once in a while.
Yeah.
We got to get a drop for that or something like that for the nuts on the table. All right. So let's just move on. All right. Let's just keep this thing moving. There's no reason to be dragging us on. So let's go to Evan Engram, right? Which is very volatile, right? The dude played 8 games last year, 11 the year before. However, when he plays, the dude is strong, right? He played 8 games last year, played 83% of the snaps, 23% from the slot. Ran a route on 80% of his snaps, 68 targets, 22% target share, commanded 25% target share inside the red zone, 13.7 fantasy points per game. The writing on the wall, though, or the big elephant in the room always with him is, can he fucking stay healthy for once, right? Can we get full 16 games out of Evan Engram? Because I think if he can, like, he's a lock for a top 5 tight end. Super athletic tight end. Everything's there. It's just he's never been able to stay healthy, and can he do it?
Yeah, that's all it is. His rookie year, he was tight end for 15 games his rookie year. Then I think it went down to like 11 or 13 the year after that. Last year, though, he only appeared in 8 games, and he still only finished 12 points away from the tight end 12, who was Mike Kiseki. Just 12 points away from him, and only played half a season. So he did, like, theoretically, he doesn't even have to play. I mean, even if he gets us to 12 or 13 games, like, he can still give us a tight end 1 season just based off of his athleticism and, how good he is when he is on the field. But that's the thing. You never know when he's going to be healthy, when that injury is going to come, or if it comes. So that's the thing with him. Right now, he is coming off of draft boards at 705 as tight end 7. So, man, that's what do you think about that price? Are you going to be willing to take that gamble at that price? Are you going to wait a little bit? Or what would you be doing at 705? Because to me, that's kind of like that point where that's not a huge risk to take, but if you're taking him as your tight end 1, like, you better follow that up. Not relatively soon, but you better, like, if you take him as your tight end 1, you still have to be keeping in the back of your mind, like, okay, is this the round that I take my tight end 2 just in case?
Yeah, it's exactly it with him. He's turned into a little bit like Jordan Reed, right? In a way, that if he can't stay healthy. But I don't hate that ADP. I don't think that's crazy. For me, I don't know. We've talked about it a lot lately, but it feels like the tight end position is super deep this year. Like, it just feels like, to me, like, when I got down to like the 19th, 20th guy, I was like, man, I could move this guy up to like 12 If I, like that's how strongly I feel about a lot of these late round tight ends. So I just don't feel the need to take, Evan Engram there. So I probably wouldn't do it unless it's like a tight end premium league or something. But obviously, in that case, he's going to be going higher. But
right.
I just think the risk there is probably not worth the reward.
Yeah, I agree. Like I said, that's that spot where it's just like, do you want to do that?
It's just like something about it doesn't feel right. Like, it feels like I'm gonna let somebody else do it. Like I like him, I'm gonna rank him as top 5 tight end, but I'm gonna let somebody else take him because I'm not gonna mess with that risk. But if he stays healthy, he could easily, like I said, smash that and be a top 3 or 4 tight end. So, all right, let's move on to the next. Now this is where we really start getting different in all of our rankings, where it starts to get pretty dramatic on some of them. So let's move on to number 6. I have Hayden Hearst at tight end 10. You have Hayden Hearst at tight end 6. Now with him, this is basically, we're assuming some here with him because he's never had a breakout year. Obviously because of Mark Andrews there in Baltimore, but they traded him to Atlanta over the offseason. Now he steps into a role that is 111 targets that are now gone. Over, I think it's 257 total targets are gone now from that offense from last year, and obviously Todd Gurley's going to take some of that with his coming in, and now Hayden Hearst. But can you realistically feel like that? You think he's going to come right in and command 110 targets?
110, probably not. But I mean, like I don't think he necessarily has to get to 110. Over the last 2 years, Hooper averaged 92 targets. 73 catches, 723 yards, and 5 touchdowns. Again, that's over the past 2 seasons. You mentioned the amount of targets that Atlanta's missing. Obviously, Gurley's going to get some, but last year I think Freeman had 70, and that number kind of surprised me. I didn't think he had that many over the course of the year. But just between Hooper, Freeman, and Mohamed Sanu, that was 209 targets. So obviously, there's enough to go around. Ridley's going to get a bump. Julio's going to stay where he's always been. Gurley will be involved. That's still plenty enough targets if he can get to even like that 90-ish range, and he can provide us with. I mean, let's be honest, to be a tight end 1, you really don't need to do that much. Like I said, last year Engram was only 12 points away from having a tight end 1 season. He only played 8 games. So if Hurst can even get 70% of what that production has been for Hooper the past 2 years, he's easily going to have a tight end 1 season. And like you said, man, like there's so many guys that like every time I opened up the Fantasy Pros like ranking platform, I ended up moving like 12 guys up and down from like 9 down to 15, 15 up to 12. So they've been all over the place. But I do believe that just going into that situation, like you're not going to move teams like that and just step into a situation that's going to be so good. So I do believe that he ends up finishing as a mid tight end 1, and I feel pretty confident in that.
How high would he have to go for you to be out on Hayden Hearst? So if he started going like the 8th round, would you be out?
Dude, he is going 1 pick after Evan Engram right now, according to Fantasy Football Calculator. So Engram was going at 705. Hayden Hearst is going at 706.
Oh no! Okay, well I had 706.
I was super surprised to see that. I definitely was not expecting that. I thought basically
one thing to remember with Fantasy Football Calculator is they go off of like the last 3 to 5 days, I think it is, of their numbers. So, it doesn't take much for one of these guys to really start to move up quickly. He is somebody that a lot of people are really high on. I like Hayden Hearst. I have him ranked 10th. You have him ranked 6th. But I do think I think it's in the 7th round. I don't think I wouldn't mess with that. Like that takes out the upside. Last year, like for a good example, Austin Hooper was going like 10th, 11th round.
Yeah, he was double digit.
Which is why we loved him so much, because like all offseason we couldn't figure out. Like the dude had 92 targets. He had like 60 or 70 receptions. Like there was so much to like about Austin Hooper, but he just was never moving up into the ADP. So he was such an easy guy to get in the 10th, 11th round. But if he's going in the 7th, like no thanks. Like I can't mess with that. Something that's still that volatile. There's no guarantee that he's going to get that huge of a target share. Like I like his upside a lot. But at the same time, there's still stuff to, there's still red flags there. They did move on from him, but we'll see if he can come in year one and command that kind of target share in this offense.
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, I was definitely surprised to see that Fantasy Pros consensus rankings has him at tight end 13, which is kind of what I was expecting to see with reflecting his ADP as well. According to Best Ball 10s, he has an ADP of 109.46, so he seems to be going a little later in the Best Ball 10s ADP over the same course of time. Versus, so tight end 10 for Best Ball 10's ADP. So I definitely found that to be interesting. So at that point, I don't think I would draft him there, because if you draft him at that point, you're basically saying that he is 1,000% just going to be Austin Hooper, and I don't necessarily think that his production might pan out that way, but he's definitely stepping into a situation where he has that opportunity to do so. And with the tight end position, especially, that's what I'm going to be chasing. I'm going to be chasing the opportunity and the available targets there.
I agree. So, all right. So let's go ahead and move on to Jarek Cook. We have him at tight end 7. I believe I have him higher than what you do by a couple of spots. No, actually you do. I have him at 9. You have him at 7. So again, with Jarek Cook, I feel like I can move him up a little bit too. But it's interesting with him because, he was another guy that was super, super fucking efficient last year. He only played 55% of the snaps. He did miss some games, but he only ran around on 58.2%. But he only got 65 targets, averaged 4.6 targets per game, 9 deep targets, only a 13.5% target share. However, he finished with 12 fantasy points per game, 43 receptions, 705 yards, 5 touchdowns. His 16.4 yards per reception was first in the league. And his 10.8, he was also at 10.8 yards per target. And he had 10 straight weeks last year of tight end 1, of being a tight end 1. So, he was super efficient. 4th in fantasy points per route, and also 4th in fantasy points per route, and 1st in fantasy points per target last year. He averaged 2.58 fantasy points per target. So, the guy was super efficient last year. Really started to come on more when Drew Brees returned. But, like I said, he missed a little bit of time. But Jarek Cook is somebody that I know a lot of people like this offseason as well. Where do you come in on him?
Yeah, around that same range. I think the thing that held him back last year and why his numbers weren't as high as they could have been is he kind of had that late season surge, kind of like a junior Tyler Higbee, if you will. Obviously, not to the same extent, but didn't really pick up in terms of his production until week 10. 6 for 74 against Atlanta. Then he had a 6 for 99, a touchdown, 3 for 85. So is that going to be there for the whole year? Obviously, with the addition of Emmanuel Sanders, now they finally have a legitimate wide receiver 2 down there as well. But I was a little surprised to see with Manny Sanders that he only had, I think, was on the outside for 72% of his snaps. I kind of he seemed to me like he would have been a heavier slot guy. So if they're going to kind of put him in that same role and be more willing to move Michael Thomas inside, that's not going to take away from Jarek Cook, those intermediate targets over the middle. So if Drew Brees can be what he's been in terms of we talked about it on Tuesday and kind of why I'm a little lower on him. He's going to need to keep up that accuracy because I think the attempts are going to come down. But obviously, that's still going to be a good offense no matter what because of how efficient Drew Brees is going to be. And like we've been talking about, and the whole theme for tight end is he going to be able to produce the touchdowns to keep him in that tight end 1 conversation? And with as much as they can move the ball and with the weapons they have, I think he will be able to. But I'm not going to be drafting him until a little later.
Yeah, I like Jarek Cook, and it showed us how efficient he was last year. So I don't know, I have no problem with taking him. He is going?
He is going tight end 11 at 10:02.
And see, that is to me, that's like a slam. Give me that all day. I'll take Jarek Cook in the 10th round all day if you'll find about it. If he doesn't last the whole year, fine, I'll pick up somebody else. But in that offense. I still think that he has the opportunity to be the number 2 target in that offense. He did miss games last year, so I think he probably would end up being much more closer to, probably 80, whatever, maybe around 80 targets, something like that last year, maybe around 900 yards. So, depending on how things planned out. So I really like Jarek Cook, especially at that tight end 11 ADP, in the 10th round. So, let's go ahead and jump over to our next contestant here, and that is Darren Waller.
Yeah, now, man, I want you to go. I want you to go first on this one because you have him ranked as tight end 5, and I have him outside of my top 12. So, whisper a little bit. Tell me about Mr. Waller here.
Well, I mean, the dude was a monster last year, right? And we know he's an athletic freak. He's one of the most athletic tight ends in the league. And he kind of came out of nowhere, but I should say he came out of nowhere because I know he was somebody that we were really excited about last year. But anyways, he commanded 90% snap share, played 15% in the slot, 76.3 route participation, which was 4th best. His 117 targets, averaged 7.3 targets per game, 11 deep targets, 24% target share, 17.5% of the red zone targets, and 13.8 fantasy points per game. There's a lot to like about that. He had 1,100 yards, only 3 touchdowns. I think there's some positive regression coming his way in terms of the touchdown department. And you look at what they added. Yes, they added Henry Ruggs, but he's not a guy that you're worried about in terms of, I think, volume, at least year one. I don't think he's somebody that's going to eat into Darren Waller's target share. And they know that Derek Carr likes to check down, and I think Darren Waller is that perfect safety valve for him. And so I don't think Darren Waller's target share is going to drop that much. I mean, I think it's possible that it drops from the 117, but I still think he comes in somewhere close to 100 targets. And if he does, I mean, he was still really efficient, 12.7 yards per reception, which was 6th best in the league. 57.9 contested catch rate, which was also 1st in the league. So there's still lots to like with Darren Waller, and I still think there's some room to grow here. I'm not first seeing a 1,100 yard receiving season again. I think maybe it comes in a little closer to maybe 900 yard receiving. I think that's still certainly possible, but maybe up that target or that touchdown number a little bit to really kick things up a little bit. So I still like Darren Waller. I still think he's one of those more safer options. And I know they signed Jason Witten, but that really doesn't scare me. Jason Witten is dust. And so I don't know. Like, I think with everything combined, like I said, I know they added Henry Ruggs, but and Bryan Edwards, but it doesn't scare me that much. I still think Darren Waller is probably the leader in targets here, and this looks much more like the San Francisco situation where he is going to continue to be that target hog.
Okay. I mean, I was kind of looking at that as more of a necessary evil for him to be that involved. I mean, obviously the dude is an athletic freak, being at his size, 6'6", 250, ran a 4.46, which was just absurd. But Tyrell Williams is banged up. They thought they were going to have Antonio Brown. That obviously did not pan out. And with the additions they made, if Tyrell Williams can be healthy, like, I think there's just going to be more targets that are going to be viable, for Derek Carr. Even though he does like to check down, I think we're all expecting, or at least hoping, that Josh Jacobs is going to be more involved in the passing game. So maybe he becomes a little bit more of that underneath target. Then Bryan Edwards, got to give it up for that guy there. And I think he could play that big underneath role as well. So that to me is why I have him lower than this. But again, this is one of those things where there's not going to be too many rankings outside of like tight end 2 that I'm going to look at and be like, nah, man, you're crazy. I can't get behind that, just because of how, outside of, we kicked it off at the beginning of the show, outside of the top 4, after you get past 4, the whole thing can go in the air. But for me, for Waller, like I said, I think last year was just a case of they literally just didn't have any other viable targets, with Williams being banged up, no AB like they were expecting. And then the additions they made, I don't see the opportunity coming for him the way that I can see the opportunity for some of the guys I have ahead of him.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, for me, I just feel like I think his role is a little bit more solidified than some of these other guys, but I don't know. So let's move on to the next one, and that is our tight end 9. Now, this one is a little bit tougher for me as well because Tyler Higbee. I have met tight end 12. You have met tight end 8. I could probably again move him up to probably somewhere around tight end 6. Like I really like but there are certain things that hold me back from Tyler Higbee, right? One of it is that he didn't do anything really until the last 5 weeks of the season last year.
Yep.
For Tyler Higbee, he only played 66% of the snaps, ran a route on 45% of those snaps, and then 89 targets, 7 deep targets, 15.9% target share. 11.5 fantasy points per game, 69 receptions, 743 yards, 3 touchdowns, right? Now, here's the thing. Over the final 5 weeks, he was tied in 1 over that span with 107 fantasy points, which accounted for 65% of his total fantasy points for the year over those last 5 weeks of the year. So that's essentially where all of his upside came from. Now, Gerald Everett was hurt during most of that, and Gerald Everett is definitely the more athletic tight end, profiles much more as a receiving tight end. I think Gerald Everett might be a little bit more involved than what people think. Now, could they go to more 12 personnel, which they've talked about, which is what they kind of did last year because of the fact. But I feel like if they did that, and with Gerald Everett on the field, I think that opens things up more for Gerald Everett than it would for Tyler Higbee, because they would probably ask Tyler Higbee, who's a much better pass blocking tight end than what Gerald Everett is, to ask him to block, which is what Tyler Higbee's always been kind of known for up to this point. So I think there is I think Gerald Everett, probably by most, and even by me, is probably should be ranked higher than what that he is. Because I think there's still a scenario where Gerald Everett, because if you remember, heading into last year, in reports of last year, it looked like Gerald Everett was the breakout tight end, right? And people were really excited about him. And he is also a very athletic tight end. And I think at some point we might be overlooking Gerald Everett and his involvement in this offense, and might be overplaying our hand with Tyler Higbee. And so that is what concerns me with Tyler Higbee. That's why I moved him down to 12, just because I think there is certainly some uncertainty there with him. He's going at tight end 9 in the 8th round, according to Fantasy Football Calculator, and then among consensus, he is 8th according to Fantasy Pros, which is just too high for me for somebody that only has 5 weeks of production.
Yeah, he was one I struggled with in terms of ranking, because I have all of the same concerns. It's really odd how basically the entire fantasy community is just like pushing Everett aside, even though he was the one who started off the season. If you were just to put Everett's numbers up top from weeks 1 to 10 before he got injured, and then just see like Rams tight end week 13 to 16 when Higbee blew up, you'd be like, oh man, that's pretty sick. Everett came back, and he really took off there at the end of the year. Obviously, even Everett's peaks didn't amount to the absurd run that Higbee had at the end of the season, especially carry you through your fantasy playoffs. But Everett was tight end 6 once he got a little bit more involved in week 4. From week 4 to 10, he was tight end 6 on the season. So, like you said, I think we're all expecting that they move to a little bit more 12 personnel. Obviously, Cooks is gone. That basically just leaves Woods and Kupp. So it's going to be interesting to see how they do this. Both of these tight ends are guys that I think I would prefer to have in best ball situations where I don't have to try and figure out what week to start them, especially if they go to heavier 12 personnel, because I think that's going to be the case of I could easily see this being, 2 weeks in a row, it's Higbee, then Everett is the one who outproduces him for the next 2 or 3 weeks, and it just keeps going back and forth like that. Either that or they just vulture each other the entire year, and they kind of just, cancel each other out, and they just stay in the, back end, tight end 1 on a week-to-week basis. So this is going to be a really interesting situation to watch, and it's, this would be a situation where it would be helpful to have all of the training camp news and everything else coming out to see how these guys are being used during camps and OTAs and all that. So this is just going to have to be a situation to watch. You already mentioned the ADP for Higbee going at 801, and that's again same thing with Hayden Hearst. If you're taking Higbee at 801, you are counting on him being the guy that we saw over the past 4 to 5 weeks of the season in 2019. Compared to how sparingly he was used at the beginning of the year. Because if you just look at the routes that he ran starting in week 1, it was 12, 3, 23, 15, 6, 7, 9, 7. And then starting in weeks 12 and 13, that's where it jumped up. And he ended up finishing with 17, 29, 22, 44, 33, and 35 routes run to finish out week 17. So it's this is a situation where I had a difficult time ranking him, but I guess I'm kind of just buying into the fact that of the peaks for Higbee were higher and sustained than they were for Everett. Does that carry over? I mean, it remains to be seen. But if anyone wants to skip out on Higbee's price at that 801, I wouldn't blame them one bit.
Yeah, that's something I could do it. I think there's so many other factors that go into that. And to be honest with you, I'd rather just if I want to take a second tight end or something, I would just take a shot later on Gerald Everett. And because I think Gerald Everett's pretty much free right now. I think for most leagues he's going to go undrafted. And I think that could be a mistake. But you're right. I think this is something that we're going to have to monitor through the offseason to see how this is going to shake out. Because I don't think it's as clear cut as people think that it's going to be. So, all right. Let's move on to number 11, and that is the big hot name of Mike Gesicki, right? Super athletic tight end. He's somebody as well that kind of took a while to get going last year, but once he did, it was fantastic. Ran almost 70%. He had a 70% snap share, ran a route on 71.6% of the time, 89 targets, 13 deep targets, 15.3 target share. Ended up with 51 receptions, 571 yards, 5 touchdowns, and then finished with 11.2 yards per reception and 6.4 yards per target. Now, things really started getting going with him. 5 of his last 6 games, he was scored. He was among the tight end ones and scored all 5 of his touchdowns over those last 5 of his 6 last games. Right, so he was somebody that was kind of a late bloomer. Now, with everything considered, I think Mike Gesicki is still a solid option. I think there's clearly room for him to grow. I think to be a more consistent option in this offense. I do think this offense actually takes a little bit of a step forward this year. We'll see what happens with with having Ryan Fitzpatrick there. That is fantastic. He is likely the number 2 or number 3 target in this offense behind Devontae Parker and possibly Preston Williams. I think there's still lots of like here with Mike Gesicki, and I really like targeting him in those middle rounds. I mean, right now, 13th round seems a little ridiculous to me. I think he's somebody that should probably be going in that 10th, 11th round range. So if he continues to go in 13th, which I don't think it's going to happen, I think that is going to move up considerably. And I think you do start seeing him go in the 10th, 11th round once we get to August. And I'm still okay with that.
Yeah, even at that price, I'd still be buying too. But I think it is possible that he stays a little bit lower just because – obviously his rookie year, leave it to Adam Gase to take someone who me and you could sit down and watch and be like, oh, this guy can't really block, but he's super athletic. You should probably just make him like a move tight end. Leave it to Adam Gase to be like, you know what? Let's put him in on the line and make him learn how to block. That's what we're gonna do here. But obviously, with the coaching changes, they basically come out and said that they're looking at him as a more of like a slot receiver, as that move tight end piece. And we've kind of been talking about people just buying into what they've seen recently. And Devontae Parker is another guy who falls into that, where it's just like, oh well, there's that 1 year. It only took 5 years to get here, but we're buying in, and this is how it's going to be going forward. So if he falters a little bit, if Preston Williams, as much as we like him, and I do like him as a late round wide receiver target, if if he was a little bit of a flash in the pan, which I don't think he was, Gesicki could be looking at being like a centerpiece of this passing offense. If things go like that. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with Fitzpatrick and how fast they try to bring Tua along, and to see how early he's ready, because I do think for fantasy purposes that Fitzpatrick might be the guy that we want as the quarterback, right? But this has probably been my favorite value of the guys that we've talked about, and just going based off of their current prices, I think I'd rather have Gesicki over guys like Hayden Hearst, over Higbee, over Jarek Cook, and some of the other guys that we've talked about so far.
Yeah, I mean he's priced much more appropriately. At least right now he is. So if that continues, that's something that I'm going to be investing heavily in. So let's talk about these last 2 guys that we have here. Tight end 11. Now this is we get really different here over the next two. Okay. Now one, I need you to explain to me, what did Hunter Henry do to you? Who hurt you? Okay, because I have Hunter Henry at tight end 8. You have Hunter Henry at tight end 19. I need you to try to explain that to me, because last year he finished with 80% snap share, 73.9% route participation, 7 deep targets, 18% of the targets or target share, 55 receptions, 652 yards, 5 touchdowns, 12.3 fantasy points per game. He was 11.9 yard per reception was 11th. His 8.6 yard per target was 9th. He was also 14th to fantasy points per route run. Now, you may say, Kevin, wait a second. That was with Phillip Rivers. Tyrod's here. So I went and I was like, well, let me go look with Tyrod's 3 years in Buffalo whenever he had Charles Clay, who I think we could agree Hunter Henry is a better player than Charles Clay is, right? Anyways, Charles Clay in 2015 played 13 games. He was tight end 17 in 13 games, 75 targets, which was second most on the team, 51 receptions, 528 yards, 3 touchdowns. 2016, he had 87 targets, which was most in the most on the team. He only 15 games, had 552 yards, 4 touchdowns. And then he had 74 targets, 49 receptions, 558 yards, 2 touchdowns. Now, like I said, I feel like that Charles Clay is definitely a much better player. Hunter Henry is a much better player than Charles Clay is. And I think that he still probably finds himself, which, not to mention the fact that this division that he's in, I think is going to take a step forward. I think this is a team that's going to have to throw the ball a little more. I know they're going to try to lean on their defense. That is one of the best in the league. But I think Hunter Henry gets his. And I think, at the very least, I think he can match what he did last year. And he still was, 10th in fantasy points per game. I don't know. I don't know what there's not to like. So at 19, that's like he's going to get like 300 yards and 2 touchdowns. Like, is he going to get hurt after 2 weeks? Or 3 or 4 weeks or something? Is that what you're projecting?
I'm not I mean, he is yet to play a full 16, right? What is stopping me from having him higher is just the fact that I do think that Anthony Lynn and the Chargers are just going to want to run the ball and lean on that defense and just ask the quarterback in the passing game to do as little as possible. I think it's going to be kind of like a similar situation to what the Titans were. I mean, obviously they don't have a Derrick Henry kind of running back, but I think it's going to be a situation where they're trying to slow the plays down, slow the pace down, lean on the defense, and just split they're going to have to divvy up that work, obviously, and with the running backs. But I think there's also, you have to take into consideration Keenan Allen, Mike Williams also there, Eckler, hell of a pass catcher, and what he does in the receiving game just completely vaulted him to fantasy stardom last year. So I just don't see the volume, and that there are other guys where I see an easier path to targets ahead of him. Not really taking anything away from the player himself, because I do like Hunter Henry, as a player and as a talent in the NFL. But I think we're going to be looking at a pretty boring offense to watch with the Chargers, and it's going to be, if that defense stays healthy. On paper, they are one of the best defenses in the league. If that defense can stay healthy and play up to what their talent level is, I think that's what Anthony Lynn is banking on, and I just think we see just a low volume offense in terms of the passing game, and I think Hunter Henry is going to be the 3rd target in that target totem pole at best, possibly even 4th, depending on how they split that up. So that's why I have him so low. But if you can basically take tight end fucking 13 down to 23. Just let me put my hand in the bag, pull out a name, and I'm going to be fine with it. So for Hunter Henry, like I said, that's where I'm sitting. Is I just don't think that that's going to be a high volume. I think it's going to be a slow paced offense, and I think they're just going to try and lean on the defense and win games that way.
While all that's true, I still don't think it's going to be tough for him with his 600 yards and 5 touchdowns to match that. That's right in line with pretty much what Charles Clay did back whenever he was in Buffalo with Tyrod Taylor. I do think that there's an opportunity we see Justin Herbert sometime this year as well. We'll see on that. But I don't know. I just thought, I was like, whoa, like, what did Hunter Henry do to you? Like, have you drafted him? He's gotten hurt the last couple of years. But
actually, I'm not sure if I've ever had Hunter Henry on a team that I'm thinking about it. But like I said, man, there's just guys ahead of him where I can see them getting to basically all you need to be a tight end one in the NFL for fantasy purposes, like 50 for 500 in like 2 or 3. You get to that, and you're basically going to be a back end tight end one.
Well, he was tight end 8 last year, like I said, with 650 yards and 5 touchdowns. Like, that is not exciting whatsoever, and that's what got him there. So I don't know. Hey, it could happen, but if he's going to tight end 20, tight end 21, or tight end 19, whatever you have him at, I'm fucking all about it. Like, smash that button for me. Like, I will be all aboard Hunter Henry there if I can get him at that rate. But
what about tight end 10 at 807 in according to Fantasy Football Calculator, and Best Ball 10's tight end 8 with an ADP of 95.9?
That I don't know. I would consider it. I don't hate that. I don't think that's egregious for him. I just think I'm much more of a late round tight end guy. Like, I would much rather take my tight end later. If I'm not going to take Travis Kelce or Mark Andrews or George Kittle, then I'm just going to wait until the 10th, 11th, 12th round to grab a tight end and and go and move on from there. Because I don't think there's a huge difference between the tight end 8 and the tight end 15. To be honest with you. So, in terms of upside when you're drafting. So, let's move on to the other one where there's another massive gap between the two of them. Jonnu, which, of course, I'm Team Jonnu. I've been Jonnu all offseason, and I have him at tight end 7, which is probably hot for some people. And then you have him at tight end 21. So, almost not even a tight end 2.
Yeah, I was talking about every time I pull up the Fantasy Pros platform, I keep moving these guys around. I did move him up to tight end 17, so...
Well, that is the disrespect on my man Jonnu. So I've talked about him a ton over the last couple of, really the last month. I don't really need to go further in depth really that much on it. I think that he takes a big step forward. He's still only 24 years old. I think there's still opportunity to grow here. Despite the fact that he ran 24% or 74% of the snaps, he only ran a route on 48% of those. And then he only had 11% target share. He averaged 7 fantasy points per game, which was 21st. He finished with 439 yards, 35 receptions. But there is some positive signs with him. He was number 3 in fantasy points per target, number 10 in fantasy points per route. And he was also 8th with yards per reception at 12.5. So there's a lot to like with Jonnu Smith. I think he's super athletic. I do think, like I've said before, I anticipate this Titans offense having to throw a little bit more. I think that at worst, he's the number 2 target in this offense behind A.J. Brown. So there's a lot to like here. I think we saw it last year. They even were using him a little bit at running back. So I think he's a very versatile guy and somebody I really like. And like I've said before, I wouldn't be surprised if he finishes the top 5 tight end this year. I think he has that in him. I think that range of outcome is certainly there. And so I really like some Jonnu.
Maybe I'm just a Titans hater, man. I don't know. But to me, I look at Mike Vrabel and he looks exactly like the kind of coach I would expect to be like, we're just going to stick with exactly what we did last year. To hell with all this passing. We're going to be defense and running game, and I don't care if we fall behind double digits because the running game and the defense will get us right back into it.
Well, everybody has a plan until you get punched in the mouth, right? And that what happens. Like everybody, that may be what you want to do. That's my problem with them is I don't think that's what they're going to be able to do. But I don't think their defense is as good, and I think that which is a problem, which we'll talk about next week. I can't wait to get to next week to talk about running back because I'm ready to talk about Derrick Henry and his egregious ADP right now and where people are ranking him and everything else because I think it's ridiculous. I think he's probably the most volatile player in the entire draft. But we'll talk about that next week on Tuesday, or on Monday, right? Yeah. Anyway, Keep going.
Yeah, but I mean, if you look at last year, 4, I think, tight end 1 weeks, and
he was another guy that late he came on late of the year. which is true because that was kind of one of the first things with him was like, well, he had that he was the tight end one in that offense for like weeks, right? Because Delaney Walker got hurt early in the year, and he didn't really do anything with it. But once that offense really started humming is whenever he really started to come on.
Yeah, I mean those last 4 weeks. So starting week 14, tight end 11, tight end 6, tight end 10, and then week 17 against Houston, which hopefully you're not playing then. And if you are, hopefully you didn't play Johnny because that was tight end 55 with a big old gooser in week 17. So I don't know. I mean, I get what you're saying with everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth, but I just feel like Vrabel will just be like, I guess I just have to swing harder. Like I don't need to really duck and try and change my stance here. Try and do something different. I just need to wind up and see if I can hit back a little bit harder. I mean, he didn't have over. He only had 3 weeks where he ran over 20 routes. So I don't know. I just must be a hater. I just can't buy into this offense, and it's because it sets up really nicely for him, right? Because you basically have AJ Brown. Corey Davis, I think I'm hoping that he's one of those change of scenery guys and he goes somewhere else and he can start to pick up to where, what the majority of us thought he was going to be. But outside of that, there's not a lot of competition for targets. I'm completely on board with you. I don't think this defense is what it appeared to be last year. I think that falls off a little bit. But then you're going to have the fall off from Ryan Tannehill as well, because I don't think he is what we saw with his crazy run, and we talked about that earlier this week. So that's just one where he's a guy who I'm going to be passing on. But with his ADP tight end 16 at 1309, he's one of those guys where if you do draft him, he's going to be someone who's easily wavered out. I mean, you can just kind of drop him and pick someone up and just play the waiver game with the tight end position this year.
Yeah, but he's going to be a top 5 tight end, and we're gonna circle back to this later. But
nuts on the table, baby.
Yeah,
let's go.
That's what you got to do. You got to put him out there. So Johnny Smith, tight end 7 for me. Anyways, so that pretty much rounds out the consensus top 12 that we have for tight end. So